There is something in Sector 4. Something's here. Something's definitely here.
It's our worst nightmares come to life.
I know what you're thinking. No, this is not that Descent movie. It's another one. And this is actually a 2023 movie directed by Matt Green. And is a very low budget film and is a horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy movie, I guess you would call it. It's not really horrific, but I would probably broadly put it under that horror banner. But it is a faith-based movie. Oh yes, we're talking about a faith-based movie. Now, before we go any further, I don't know why you would call this movie The Descent. I mean, when there's clearly a major other horror movie called The Descent, it's clearly going to get mixed up for it. So maybe that was the design. It actually started life as a movie called Finn. Now, neither of those titles really have anything to do with this movie. Now, let's talk about the premise. So, we learn that there is some type of apocalyptic event. It doesn't actually say it specifically, but it's inferred that it's the rapture. And there are pockets of kind of civilization left after this, a few years after this, where life is somewhat continuing as normal with all the non-believers and all of this. And it focuses on one particular guy who is pretty much a cynic about everything. And he's kind of introduced to this sort of, I guess you would call it cult, for lack of a better word. And I think it's meant to be like a little bit of a metaphor on sort of alternative, like spiritual type religions, if you see what I mean. Kind of like you know, the wellness places and all that kind of thing. And, you know, he's kind of talked him to go into this sort of group by this girl, and sort of he goes there and it's all, you know, all very lovey-dovey and lots of kind of like, you know, happy-clappy types. And they're attacked by these sort of creatures. And they're described as being kind of locust-like or scorpion-like. However, there is a neighbour who seems to be able to repel them. And the reasons for that, he has found his faith. And what will happen after that, you'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss. Now, to be fair, I am not a faith person. I am an atheist. So, I'm coming at this from the position of someone who is not a believer in anything spiritual whatsoever. But we'll talk about the actual film as a film rather than, you know, preaching and stuff. But we'll come back to that. What do I think that works? Now, this is clearly a low budget film. It is a very, very low budget film. And you can tell by the way they kind of shoot these monsters, which we'll come on to. But I do think there is some wise choices by the filmmakers here. Now, because of the low budget, I think they realise that their kind of creature effects are a little on the cheap side. Although it's a little frustrating, they wisely keep these creatures somewhat obscured to the shadows. You only see parts of them. You never really get like a good look. Now, that might be frustrating, but I think the decision here was probably the smart one, because obviously this is such a low budget film. There's not really much in the way of location shootings and things like that. It's very, you know, a lot of it is just inside someone's house for the most part, but we do get a couple of external shots. But yeah, it's clearly kind of quite a low budget film, so I think it was probably more smart filmmaking than anything else, because when we do see these creatures, I have to say they looked pretty cool. I mean, you can't quite make out what they actually look like to a degree. You kind of see like a claw, a foot, maybe a close-up of a face, but you never really see the thing in its entirety. But I think what we did see, pretty good. You know, pretty good for the kind of the bits that we did see. I'll give credit where credit is due. I didn't think the acting was too bad in this movie. It's kind of easy, I think, for someone like me to go, faith-based movies, they're all a load of rubbish. But the acting was fine, I thought. Everyone did a fair job. Do I think the dialogue is a little hokey? Yes. But, I think the performances, they were kind of B-movie-ish, but they were fine. It wasn't like distractingly bad acting or anything like that. Everyone did an okay performance. That was fine. And I gotta say, for the production value that this clearly has, which is obviously quite low, the kind of the technical side of the stuff, the kind of the cinematography, the camera placement, the shot composition, all that sort of stuff, editing, all to a reasonable standard, I would say. Nothing really could have stood out as being too clunky in regards to that. And I do think I have seen some faith-based films that I still were quite legitimately interested in. I reviewed one some years ago, which was about sort of people going back in time to murder Jesus before he got famous and all that. So that was an interesting premise. And I do think there is an idea here about kind of an apocalyptic event where they kind of try and disguise the sort of the religious aspects of it to a degree, at the beginning at least. But you can kind of watch it, I suppose, like a sort of end of the world style movie. And it even is relatively ambitious in places, like we see our opening kind of sequence. It actually takes place in an outer space, kind of looking down at the planet whilst the rapture is happening, which I thought was kind of quite a neat sort of concept there. The movie's also mercifully short. It only runs just over an hour, so it doesn't kind of outstay its welcome, and you can kind of get past it pretty quick. And there's lots of kind of metaphors here, as I say, about false idols and putting your faith too much in corporations or government when you should be talking about the church and having faith and all that. So I suspect it will play quite well to those of you who are of a religious disposition, Christianity, Catholic or whatever. But, there it is. Let's talk about what doesn't work. This does feel preachy. This movie is one of those ones where it's not, when the movie's said and done, you think, I feel like that was a sermon, So, yes, it does get a little bit preachy, to be honest with you. And it ends up being quite goofy. As I said, the dialogue, I've got to be honest with you, is pretty hammy. And we have a character that we learn who has found his faith since the rapture. So although he's not gone up with the rest of them, he has a certain level of protection from these creatures. And it's just like, well, that's kind of like, a cheat code, it feels like, to the threat in this movie. So it's kind of really deflates the stakes. Now, I guess if this movie's whole point of existing was to try and get this message across, then great. But if it's to have a movie which is going to have stakes and entertainment, I feel it kind of undercuts that quite a lot, to be honest. There's a lot of conversations in rooms in this film. Normally something we talk about when we talk about asylum style movies, but here we are, lots of conversations in rooms, lots of theological debate and things like that. And like I said, I think the acting is fine, but I do feel the characters are written to be a little bit on the goofier side. And it really doesn't give you a lot of context about what's happening. I think it's trying to play its cards close to its chest in regards to, the rapture / this apocalypse and how the world is reacted afterwards. But I really didn't feel like we got nearly enough information to set up this movie in regards to what is the status quo now. And obviously when it's filmed, we filmed in one of these areas, which is fine. So it just looks all good. There's no desolate areas or anything like that. It's just a normal kind of suburban neighbourhood because this is one of the areas that was unaffected or something. Anyway, so overall, it's kind of a cheesy B movie at the end of the day. taking the religious stuff aside, but I do think it is quite preachy. Looking at it purely based on a film, I'll give it a 4 out of 10. It's a below average film, but it's not a train wreck. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.